Prologue. After the resonance cascade. The desert wind carried an acrid tang of ozone and metal as dawn broke over the Black Mesa Research Facility. 2 days earlier, the resonance cascade had ripped open a rent in reality itself, tearing apart the concrete facade of science and unleashing the horrors of Zen upon an unsuspecting world. Now, the landscape bore the scars of that moment. Shattered observation domes, crumpled support beams jutting from the sand like discarded ribs, and molten craters where experimental chambers once stood. In the nearby town of Carlsbad, New Mexico, panic had erupted within hours. Refugees spilled onto Route 285, families huddled in battered station wagons, children pressing damp foreheads against hot glass, parents shouting into radios that crackled with static. At a makeshift aid station beneath an overturned school bus, Sister Natalia, a volunteer nurse, moved among the injured. Her face, etched with exhaustion, bore witness to broken limbs and seared flesh. She clutched a half-empty bottle of saline, praying it would suffice until proper supplies arrived. Farther north, on the barren mesa above the facility, Dr. Elias Harding scanned the horizon through a damaged telescope. His hands trembled as he adjusted focus on faint, swirling lights in the sky, portal storms spawned by the cascade, each rift throbbing with indecipherable energy. He remembered the night before, the deafening roar, the tactile pull on his body as dimensions collided. Now, with the research compound smoldering behind him, he felt as if the very ground had become unsteady underfoot. Yet worse was the unknown. Reports trickled in from across the nation, tremors of otherworldly origin, livestock found mauled in fields as though by beasts from fevered nightmares, and glowing, rending wounds in pasture fences, stains of blood that refused to dry. Radio chatter spoke of more than head crabs and barnacles. They hinted at something greater, a gathering storm beyond Zen's bestiary. In a hollowed-out farmhouse southwest of Albuquerque, the Martinez family huddled in the cellar. Pedro Martinez, a retired postal worker, tended a lantern as his grandchildren whimpered beneath a hastily draped blanket. The lantern's flicker cast their faces into anxious shadows. Above, his wife Maria whispered prayers, her words smothered by the rumble of distant tremors. They had fled their home at dusk, hearing screams from the highway and fearing the worst. Now they waited, hearts hammering in unison, for the doors above to splinter under alien wrath. Back at Black Mesa, a lone field radioman named Jacob Thornton sat beside a fallen antenna mast, cradling a battered handset. His voice trembled as he spoke into the crackling speaker. "This is Thornton. Portals are widening. More rifts, North Ridge. Repeat, more rifts. Send reinforcements if you can." His words were swallowed by static and the distant scream of a head crab. Somewhere beyond the dunes, concrete columns crumbled as creatures emerged from the tears in reality. Thornton felt bile rise in his throat. There would be no reinforcements. Within the facility's command center, now hollowed and draped in half-burned papers, Dr. Harding found a hastily scrawled log penned by his colleague, Dr. Judith Mossman. The final entry read, "They climb through doorways, through walls, immune to barriers. We have unleashed a force beyond our control. Pray it ends soon." The page was stained with coffee and fear. Harding traced each letter with a shaking finger, absorbing the weight of their folly. Night closed in on the desert, and the portal storms intensified. Brilliant arcs of violet and green light zigzagged across the sky, illuminating skeletal mesas and casting jagged shadows that danced like specters. The air shimmered with unearthly energy. Even breathing felt like inhaling shards of glass. Harding turned from the log and gazed at the flickering heavens, realizing the world had changed irrevocably. In that moment, 3 lives converged under the same bruised sky. Sister Natalia tending the wounded in Carlsbad, Pedro Martinez comforting his grandchildren, and Jacob Thornton transmitting his panicked report from the edge of oblivion. Each, in their own way, braced for the coming deluge of nightmares. For the resonance cascade had only torn the veil, it had not yet unleashed the true storm. And soon, the Combine would arrive. Chapter 1. Rifts in the Sky. Hour 1. The dawn that followed the resonance cascade was eerily still. In towns and cities across North America, people strained to hear above the hum of portal storms, rifts in the sky that pulsed with sickly hues of violet and green. In Phoenix, Arizona, construction cranes halted mid-lift, their metal arms quivering as a new fissure slashed across the low desert horizon. A trio of barnacles dropped from its edge, landing on sun-baked asphalt and snapping their barbed tongues before eager workers could raise a hand. Not all the world's horrors fell from the portals, though. From one rift near the Grand Canyon emerged pulsating oozes that seeped into creek beds, dissolving river rock into bubbling acid. Rangers stationed at lookout points watched as sandstone cliffs hissed and spat, blackened stains creeping across ancient walls. A park ranger radioed for hazmat support, but the line went dead as his headset crackled with static and distant snarls. Back in suburban Phoenix, Officer Marcus Vale stood in his patrol car when the first head crab leapt onto his windshield. He fumbled for his sidearm, gut twisting as the creature's talons scratched glass. He hollered into his radio, code red, but no dispatcher answered. When the creature tumbled away, Vale stumbled from the cruiser, firing 6 shots through the windshield. The car rocked with the final impact. Vale's heart pounded, sweat beating at his temples. Across the continent, in a rural Virginia township, the farmer's early morning radio talk show crackled with reports of gouged fields and livestock missing by dawn. One caller, his voice raw with fear, described a herd of bull squids emerging through a countryside gate, their bulbous eyes reflecting the rising sun like lanterns. He said the beasts trampled his fence and roared in a voice that rattled his bones. The host, usually crackling with jocular banter, fell silent between each breath. Above Chicago, portal storms twisted skyscraper tops into surreal spires of rippling air. A squadron of National Guard helicopters hovered, their searchlights sweeping for entry points. Specialist Aisha Malik leaned out of her Huey's open door, and 240 heavy machine gun trained on a jagged rift floating above Lake Michigan. She watched as a pack of fast head crabs burst forth and sprinted in unison across the water's surface. Malik opened fire, tracer rounds glinting in the dawn. The crabs scattered, diving beneath the waves to hide. On Manhattan's east side, an elderly librarian named Ruth Carver stepped onto her balcony to smoke a morning cigarette, her only solace amid crumbling budgets and staff cuts. She watched with disbelief as a pale, lupin creature the size of a sedan leapt from a portal onto FDR Drive, its jaws snapping into vehicles like tin cans. She dropped her cigarette, eyes widening. Before she could retreat, the creature lunged toward her, teeth flashing. She bolted inside, locking doors as the street exploded with gunfire. In the desert remnants of Black Mesa's command center, Dr. Elias Harding and a handful of surviving staffers hastily compiled data logs. Harding's voice shook as he dictated a report. Portals are expanding. Thermal imaging shows energy levels increasing exponentially. We're evacuating East Ridge to bypass the largest storms. He paused, listening to the agonized shriek of something clawing at steel grates. Then he cut the feed. Outside the facility's boundary fence, Jacob Thornton squatted beside a battered ham radio. Sweat trickled down his cheek as he tuned frequencies for military responses that would never come. He keyed the mic and rasped, "This is Black Mesa Field Unit. Repeat, hostile extraplanar fauna everywhere. Request immediate extraction, medical evac, whatever you have." His plea trailed off as the radio fizzled. At Carlsbad's makeshift clinic, Sister Natalia pressed a damp rag to a teenager's thigh where barnacle acid had burned through denim to raw muscle. She murmured reassurances even as she slipped. The boy's leg convulsed. He gasped and passed out. Natalia inhaled steel-tinged air. One portal rift hovered above the clinic's roof, and through it dozens of head crabs swarmed like insects in heat. A convoy of military transports rumbled down I-25, carrying armored personnel carriers and engineer units. Corporal Dariusing, clutching the map table inside an APC, tried to chart a safe corridor. Every mile closer to Carlsbad meant another rift painted on reconnaissance screens. He cursed under his breath. "This is hopeless," he muttered, rubbing his forehead. Yet orders remained orders. The convoy turned west toward the epicenter, sirens wailing as farm-to-market roads buckled under the weight of tracked vehicles. At the road's edge, a family station wagon idled. Parents shielded their children's eyes when the first antlion burst through the asphalt, its mandibles rimmed with orange slime, claws splayed wide. The APC driver veered sharply, crushing the antlion beneath the tank tread. By the close of the first hour, the world was unrecognizable. Reports streamed from every halfway point, portal storms in Europe and Asia, entire coastal cities inundated by Zen creatures, communications satellites falling silent. Precedental briefings sputtered before screens went dark. As portals multiplied, so did the womb of the invasion. The sky shimmered with the promise of an alien empire not yet seen, and Earth's defenses teetered. Under the twisted light of rending skies, humanity braced itself for the true onslaught that would follow. Chapter 2. The first line. Hour 2. Snow fell in scattered patches over Chicago's west side, an unseasonal flurry driven by the bizarre energies of the portal storms. 15-year veteran Sergeant Lily Chin crouched behind a shattered storefront window, her breath clouding in the chill. In her gloved hands she held a tattered photograph of her daughter's 7th birthday, balloons floating against a bright blue sky, her daughter's laughter frozen in time. Moments before the first strider appeared, Lily had lain on prison bars, scribbling one final letter to her daughter in neat, looping handwriting. "My dearest Maya, if I never return, know that my love for you was stronger than fear. Remember to be brave, and laugh even when the world seems dark. I will think of you with every sunrise. Forever your mother, Lily." She folded the paper carefully, tucking it beneath her chest rig as she whispered Maya's name to steel her nerves. At the street's intersection, her platoon had erected makeshift barricades, overturned SUVs chained to lampposts, sandbags piled atop cracked pavement, and rusty steel girders fashioned into roadblocks. Engineers, their faces streaked with soot and grime, welded scrap metal to street signs, transforming them into jagged halberds meant to snag strider legs. Corporal Malik panned a thermoscope across the rubble. "Contact," he hissed. 3 blocks away, the strider emerged through a portal ring, its spindly legs slicing through layers of concrete like a hot knife through butter. Each step sent tremors into the street, shattering glass and rattling bones. Lily's orders came through the calm static. "Hold at the barrier. Disable it or die." She exhaled and signaled her team. Rocket launchers lit up with orange glare as they fired in unison. The rockets found the strider's leg joint, gouging a crater in its metal plating. The creature faltered. Hydraulic whines echoed as it recalibrated its stance. From its carapace, dozens of combined dropships descended, disgorging legions of synth foot soldiers. Their rifles glowed with lethal pulse energy. Opening fire, Platoon 3 unleashed a hail of bullets and grenades. Synthetic troopers fell in coordinated falls. Each collapse triggered a retaliatory volley that traded human lives for each clank of metal. Lily felt the backblast of an explosive rifle round as it tore through masonry above her head. Debris and dust choked the air. Amid the chaos, Private Reyes slipped from cover. A young recruit who had left his pregnant wife at the safe zone drained his pistol into oncoming synths until he ran dry. He ducked into a side alley where the concrete walls bore scratch marks, possibly where head crabs had pinned civilians earlier. Reyes's chest heaved. He switched to his knife, advancing on two synths who turned in synchronized precision and shot him in the shoulder. Reyes collapsed, pressing a hand to his wound, teeth gritted against the pain. In that instant, Lily found herself staring down the barrel of a combine rifle. The soldier's pale, expressionless face stared back through the scope. Lily squeezed the trigger. Time slowed as the shot rang out. The synth's head snapped back, and its body crumpled. Lily ducked back behind the barrier, head ringing as another charge blew a nearby SUV into flaming wreckage. Between bursts of firefights, Lily listened to the radio. All outposts breached. Evacuate West Sector. Repeat, evacuate West Sector. Godspeed. The automated message looped, over and over, each repetition a grim reminder that no reinforcement was coming. As the portal storm's winds intensified, Lily's platoon retreated to a crumbling bus depot. They left behind the smashed barricades and bodies of both comrades and enemies. Inside the depot, survivors clustered in dim corridors, echoing with distant shrieks of the injured. Engineers salvaged what explosive charges remained. Lily sat on an upturned bench, bandaged Reyes's arm with trembling fingers. He winced as she applied pressure. "You'll make it," she whispered, though her voice trembled. Reyes exhaled, tears glossing his eyes. "Just get home to Maya," he rasped. Outside, the sky shimmered with portal rifts everywhere, no longer confined to a few zones. The world had become a tapestry of gaping wounds in reality, each bleeding monsters. As they prepared to move out, Lily retrieved her daughter's photograph and kissed it gently. She rose, gripping her rifle. "Time to go," she told her platoon. And into the second hour's dying light, they marched, armed with hope and steel, facing an enemy that turned hope into ash. Chapter 3: Unrelenting Arsenal. Hour 3. The horizon was ablaze with crimson light as the third hour dawned. On a battered bridge spanning the East River, a joint task force of Army engineers and Marines braced against the frigid wind. Corporal Horace Nguyen peered through his binoculars at a Leviathan strider silhouetted against Lower Manhattan's smoking skyline. Its tri-legged frame towered like a cathedral of death, and from its mouth-like turret, it unleashed searing energy bolts that shattered steel girders. Nearby, Specialist Elena Vasquez crouched behind sandbags, reading the controls of an M3E1 infrared launch system, an experimental anti-armor weapon rumored to penetrate Strider armor. She'd trained for months on inert simulators. Now, her hands shook as she locked onto the creature's exposed hydraulic joint. "Fire when ready." Nguyen's voice crackled through her earpiece. She exhaled, steadied her aim, and squeezed the trigger. The missile erupted into the storm-racked sky, trailing a spurt of green gas. It struck the strider's joint with a thunderous impact, gouging a smoking crater. Sparks danced across metal plating as the machine stumbled. But the victory was Pyrrhic. From a rift overhead came a squadron of gunships, sleek aerial synthetics bristling with pulse cannons. They banked in perfect synchrony, tracking the Striders' defensive maneuvers before zeroing in on human positions. Their energy blasts cut through the bridge's parapet, sending concrete shards cascading into the river below. Marines mounted anti-aircraft turrets, unleashing torrents of tracer fire. The sky flickered with orange arcs, but each gunship absorbed the salvo, spiraled upward, and returned with lethal precision. A stream of pulsating fire tore through the engineer's section. Welding sparks erupted as beams vaporized support struts. On the bridge's opposite side, Private Laz Ortiz gripped a pair of salvaged pulse rifles looted from fallen synths. He and 2 other volunteers formed a skirmish line, emptying magazines as they advanced. The rifles glowed with a sickly cyan light, discharging unpredictable bolts that arced toward gunships overhead. A single bolt scorched the hull of one craft, sending it spiraling into the river in a cascade of flaming debris and remote screams. Civilians had gathered at the bridge's midpoint, families clutching children, huddled between rows of rubble. Among them stood the Ramirez family, Ana, a schoolteacher, kneeling beside her stricken husband Hector, who'd been wounded in the leg by flying shrapnel. She pressed a blood-soaked scarf to his wound and murmured reassurances through clenched teeth. Behind them, their daughter Sophia stared with wide, tear-filled eyes, hands gripping Anna's coat like tethered lifelines. As another gunship swooped low, wrecking the railings, a stray bolt ignited a parked delivery truck, its fuel tank erupting into a rolling inferno. Walls of flame rushed toward the civilians, who screamed and fled toward Nguyen's position. Soldiers formed a protective line, rifles rattling in synchronized bursts to hold back the firestorm. In the chaos, Elena reloaded her launcher. 2 more missiles remained. She hesitated as the gunships returned, circling like vultures. A sudden alarm sounded in her earpiece. Delta platoon pinned at Dock 11, Strider redeployment imminent. Elena weighed her options. Fire the last missile at the gunship menace or save it to cripple a second Strider. She chose the former. The launcher barked, and the craft tore apart in midair, its fuselage fracturing like a broken toy. But before the Emperor of War could celebrate, a fresh rift materialized behind the original one. From it emerged not Striders, but long-armored dropships depositing stalkers, twisted silhouettes of former humans, their eyes black voids and limbs elongated by combined grafts. Stalkers advanced silently between armored columns, their soulless forms impervious to small arms fire. Marines raised shotguns, but blasts passed harmlessly through their synthetic flesh, only to ricochet into comrades. Across the bridge's breadth, Marine Sergeant Victor Hamlin saw his squad falter. He sprinted forward, grabbing a fallen soldier's grenade launcher, and unleashed a cluster of buckshot rounds at the nearest stalker. The explosion erupted in a cascade of synthetic sinew and burning fuel, lighting the dusk with macabre fireworks. Above the din, the bridge groaned under the weight of combat. Cracks snaked along the concrete, water seeping through joints as structural supports fizzled beneath combined energy fire. Nguyen's voice cut through Elena's earpiece. Bridge integrity at 30%. Prepare to withdraw. With a final glance at the smoldering skyline, the engineers detonated the AR-7 demolition charges they'd wired under the bridge deck. A thunderous roar split the air as the center span collapsed into the river below, severing the Strider's prow. Soldiers and civilians alike sprinted back toward Manhattan's embattled shore, hearts hammering, lungs burning. At the river's edge, Ana Ramirez scooped Sofia into her arms and waded through icy water beside Hector, who limped on burning, bloodied legs. Elena emerged gasping, her launcher smoking. Nguyen helped Reyes to his feet. They huddled behind the ruins of a boathouse, watching the bridge's twisted remains vanish beneath dark water. All around them, men and women turned their faces upward at the dimming sky, still woven with deadly rifts. Despite the desperate sabotage, the Combine still held sway, and the hour was only half spent. In that moment, beneath the battered archway of Manhattan's nearest pier, a lone figure etched a chalk Lambda symbol on damp concrete, an unspoken vow that even as the bridge fell, the flame of resistance endured. Chapter 4, Descent into Terror. Hour 4. By the fourth hour, the sun sank beneath roiling clouds of ash and smoke. In the once bustling avenues of Times Square, neon signs flickered uncertainly, their colors muted by layers of dust. The area had been hastily converted into a field hospital. Rows of metal cots lined beneath torn awnings, floodlights casting harsh white pools of illumination on panicked faces. Dr. Adrian Holt, a trauma surgeon with unsteady hands, knelt beside a young woman whose leg had been crushed by falling debris. Her screams echoed through the makeshift ward as antlions, drawn by the scent of blood, broke through plywood barricades. The creatures burst into the open, chitinous shells glistening under floodlights, mandibles clicking in anticipation. Nurse Sophia Rees grabbed a flamethrower from a nearby crate, igniting a torrent of fire that incinerated the leading antlions in a blistering wave. But for every creature destroyed, two more scuttled through shattered walls. The flames revealed their exposed innards, diminutive litters of antlion pups writhing amid scorched concrete. Holt barked orders as his team scrambled. "Supply runners, check the east wing. Keep that corner sealed." His voice cracked with exhaustion. Blood-slick floors and the stench of burning flesh blurred his vision. He paused to catch his breath, supporting himself on a dented four-pole. A nurse shouted that a straggler head crab shell had exploded in the pantry, spraying corrosive acid across food stores. Holt watched supplies dissolve into bubbling puddles, leaving the wounded to thirst and hunger. Above the hospital, portal storms writhed against the sky. From one rift descended a horde of combined barnacles, rotund orbs swinging like pendulums from scaffolding and streetlights. Their tongues whipped outward, snagging any moving form. One snagged a masked medic, dragging him screaming into the dark maw above. The doctor's notes fluttered to the pavement, pages smeared with cursive prayers. Outside, a Reuters photographer snapped shots from behind sandbags. His camera's flash illuminated a tableau of horror. A family of four huddled against a taxi cab, their faces etched with despair as synth patrols marched past. The photographer's finger trembled on the shutter button. He lowered his camera, eyes glistening with tears, and knelt to offer water to a dehydrated child. The child's stony gaze met his before she turned away, tears tracing dusty cheeks. At a collapsed entrance, paramedics attempted to drag a makeshift stretcher through a corridor thick with rubble. On the stretcher lay an elderly man, his breath shallow, eyes glazed. Nurse Rees lifted the tarpaulin, exposing the man's frail frame. He whispered, "Is she safe?" and pointed to a photograph taped inside his jacket. A smiling woman with dark hair and two young children. Ruiz shook her head, tears brimming as she placed a gloved hand on his shoulder. Suddenly, a distant roar reverberated through the streets. A strider lumbered into view, stepping over abandoned vehicles as though they were toys. It paused before the hospital entrance, its turret swiveling to survey the terrified crowd. Screams erupted as it unleashed an energy volley, Walls exploded outward, sending bricks and bodies into the night sky. Holt rose from his crouch, adrenaline surging. He shouted to Reese, "Get the patients to the basement. Seal the stairwell." They wrestled stretchers down narrow stairs as the floor above buckled. Patients moaned, their four lines tangling as technicians tripped over cords. In the lobby, amid falling ceiling tiles, a journalist embedded with medical staff, Ian Clark, reported breathlessly into his handheld camera. "Hospitals are no longer sanctuaries. The Combine's advance leaves no refuge. We're seeing entire wings evacuated under fire." He ducked as a head-crabbed shell hurled through shattered glass, landing with a wet splat. Clark's feed cut to static. Beneath the hospital, the basement corridors were dank and narrow. Holt directed patients into a boiler room, barricading the single metal door. Outside, the Strider's stomp shook the ground, and the Citadel's distant hum seeped through vents. Nurse Reese pressed her back against the cold steel, cradling the elderly man's hand. He exhaled once, soft and final, then stilled. She bowed her head, lips moving in silent requiem. Above, the night air burned with unnatural light as portal storms brightened. Dr. Holt emerged into the street clutching a rolled-up chart. The city around him was a battlefield. Fire trucks lay mangled, streetcars derailed, and bodies strewn like rag dolls. He inhaled sharply, tasting ash and fear. Turning away, Holt limped toward a narrow alley where a line of cots stood under a battered awning. Nurse Reese joined him, her face smeared with soot. They exchanged a nod, a shared pledge to survive one more hour. And as the fourth hour waned, the world held its breath beneath the cold glare of the Combine Citadel's distant silhouette. Chapter 5, Collapse of the UN. Hour 5. The fifth hour began in bleak silence. In New York City, the United Nations Secretariat Building, monument to global unity, loomed over Lower Manhattan like a fortress of diplomacy. Inside its cavernous chambers, delegates from every nation sat in urgent session, voices rising in fear-driven argument. Ambassador Chen of China pounded a gavel. But her words were drowned by a low rumble that shook the marble floor. Moments later, security cameras cut to chaos. Through the windows, delegates watched the sky split by a new portal rift, wider than any seen before, glowing with fierce white light. Before the assembly could react, an orb larger than a city bus descended in a column of fire, vaporizing the Secretariat in a blinding flash. Smoke and debris clouded the glass atrium. The shockwave rolled across the plaza, toppling chairs and hurling papers like a violent storm of inked confessions. Outside, crowds of onlookers, journalists, protesters, refugees, were thrown to the ground. Glass shattered all around, slicing through skin and fabric. Those who remained stunned clambered to their feet, mouths agape at the ruin where diplomacy once thrived. A journalist's live feed captured the moment. A lone suit jacket, empty and fluttering in the wind. On West Street, beneath a cracked electronic billboard looping dire evacuation messages, a taxi driver named Malik Rahman helped wounded civilians crawl toward cover. He'd driven diplomats around the UN earlier that day. Now he sheltered a young protester bleeding from a graze wound. The boy clutched the driver's arm and whimpered as Rahman lifted him into his cab. The windshield spider-webbed under falling shards, but Rahman pressed the gas, weaving through the stampede. In a nearby bunker floors below ground, UN Secretary-General Tariq al-Masri sat alone among fractured communications racks. His bodyguard lay unconscious nearby, a bullet hole in his shoulder. Al-Masri stared at a flickering monitor that displayed live satellite imagery of the destroyed building. He spoke into a ham radio, This is Al-Masri. Emergency Council dissolved. All remaining nations, submit or face annihilation. His voice was calm, measured, until a tremor rattled the cables and the frequency cut to static. Back on the streets, pockets of resistance formed spontaneously. A band of former police officers and volunteers erected a barricade at a key intersection. They reinforced it with steel signage and abandoned dumpsters. Sergeant Naomi Ortiz, a decorated NYPD veteran, organized them. Hold here. Prevent combined units from cutting into Midtown. Use anything we can get our hands on. They armed themselves with shotguns and hunting rifles, bracing against the barricade as an Overwatch synth patrol advanced. Autonomous drones hovering inches above the pavement, scanning for movement. The officers opened fire, pellets cracking against reinforced exoskeleton plating. The drones emitted a shrill alarm and returned fire with microbeam emitters, sending arcs of violet energy that set the barricade ablaze. Civilians flooded back into alleyways, pulling children close. A young couple, Rosa and Miguel Delgado, pressed their newborn daughter's blanket over their faces to ward off smoke and dust. Rosa's eyes met Miguel's, and for a moment, unspoken fear passed between them. Love became their armor against despair. As midday waned, UN forces were down to token units. Marines in fatigues patrolling the west side with battered M16s, armored Humvees crawling behind them. They reported over open channels. Squad 5, Bridge 64, is hot. No reinforcements. Static. On Roosevelt Island, an emergency evacuation platform teetered on the edge of the East River. Engineers frantically loaded civilians onto a single tram car, destined for Manhattan's Upper East Side. Among them, a pale-faced woman clutched a worn teddy bear. Behind her, a rift bowed open above the river, and a wave of barnacles swung downward, their barbed tongues splattering against the truss. Engineers fired flares to distract them, but each flare only drew more creatures. Inside the tram, electrical sparks flared as barnacles broke through the windows. The tram lurched off the track, screeching toward mid-bridge. Passengers screamed and clung to one another. Just as it neared the abyss, a squad of Marines on jet bikes roared alongside, mowing down the barnacles with rapid-fire ground rounds. They leapt onto the tram's roof, pried open the doors, and hauled survivors out seconds before the tram plunged into the churning river. By the hour's end, New York's grandest institution lay in ruins, and the city vernacular was stripped to its direst brevity: evacuate, surrender, survive. The UN's symbol of hope was obliterated in a single stroke, leaving humanity's last bastion of cooperation shattered. Yet from the wreckage emerged defiance. A solo cell of resistance fighters scrawling Lambda symbols on bullet-riddled columns. Ragged clutches of civilians sharing rations and bandages. Whispers of underground routes still open beneath the tunnels. In the hollow aftermath of the UN's collapse, tiny embers of hope flickered amidst the ashes of civilization. Chapter 6. The Broadcast, Hour 6. In the labyrinthine corridors of the central train bunker, an emergency. Command hub carved beneath Grand Central Station. Captain Darren Reyes sat at a flickering monitor. His uniform bore the stains of 7 continuous hours of war. Ash smudged across his brow, oil streaked down his sleeve. Through ear jackets he heard the distant roar of combine war machines, punctuated by the sporadic crackle of gunfire above. A red alert lit up his console. Live feed incoming. The camera dialed in on Wallace Breen's broadcast studio, now commandeered by the Combine. The screen hissed before resolving into the pale, anxious features of Earth's reluctant administrator. Breen's voice, oddly calm against the backdrop of shattered glass, echoed through the bunker's speakers. Citizens of Earth, you have witnessed miracles of human achievement undone in mere hours. The Combine's victory is both inevitable and merciful. We stand at the dawn of a new era, your new era. Lay down your arms and save your lives. Compliance ensures peace. Resistance ensures annihilation. The feed swayed and glitched. Breen's lips moved precisely, but his eyes betrayed a haunted resignation, as though speaking words he did not fully believe. The screen cut to a montage of collapsed cities, Zen fauna in cages, and an image of the Citadel looming over City 17 like an unblinking eye. Captain Reyes watched in silence, then pressed his gloved fist against the speaker until the sound hummed in his bones. The bunker went still. Technicians stood frozen, eyes downcast. The promise of peace, delivered with death's warning, rang hollow. Reyes pounded the console. Shut it off. Black out that feed. A young lieutenant obeyed, severing the loop. Silence fell. In the darkness, Private Samira Njoku broke the stillness. She spoke in a whisper, voice trembling with anger. He's asking us to just die. Tears glinted on her cheeks. Sergeant Ortiz, who had helped defend the UN barricade, placed a steady hand on Njoku's shoulder. He's just their mouthpiece, she murmured. We still have one option. Outside, the Citadel's glow pierced the murk as searchlights swept the streets. Overhead, portal storms churned like cosmic whirlpools. From vents and tunnels emerged insurgents, engineers, students, and former military, passing notes, marking graffiti, igniting hope. Meanwhile, in a cramped subway vestibule miles from command, a teenage resistance sympathizer named Arlo Finch hacked into an open comm line. His laptop screen glowed with looping code as he intercepted the satellite scramble that had momentarily freed the bunker feed. With nimble fingers tapping, he began broadcasting counter-messaging on civilian channels. To those who hear, gather at the Liberty Memorial. We fight on. Across the city, disembodied voices crackled through radios in safe houses and burned-out taxis. For a fleeting instant, humanity's whispers soared above the Combine's roar. Back in the bunker, Reyes recalled his crew, a fuel driver who'd unloaded his tanker to block a Strider, a medic who'd saved his life near the East River, and a radio operator who refused orders to abandon the civilians in Carlsbad. He spoke into his palm mic. All cell units, respond with your location. We move on my mark. The lieutenant looked up, confusion and fear etched in her face. Sir, the surrender broadcast is propaganda, Reyes snapped. We move. As the 6th hour bled into its final minute, the bunker's lights dimmed in obedience to one last command: prepare for evacuation. Outside, the horizon burned with the cold glare of Citadel projectors announcing the Combine's dominion. Inside, Captain Reyes readied his team, hearts steeled against despair. They would fight on. Chapter 7, Last Flickers of Hope. Hour 7. The dawn's first gray light struggled through ash-laden skies as the 7th hour began. In the subterranean darkness of City 17's abandoned subway tunnels, Mika Delgado pressed his back against a damp wall. His shelter smelled of mold and spilled kerosene. Clutched in his grime-streaked hand was the faded photograph of his daughter, her smile frozen in a moment of innocence. Above, the Citadel's distant hum vibrated through steel rails. Mika glanced at the makeshift map scrawled on torn paper, a labyrinth of lines marking blocked routes, safe houses, and rumored resistance cells. He exhaled, voice rasping. Almost there, Anna. Above, the city's streets had become rivers of chaos. Civil protection squads herded survivors toward transit checkpoints, their batons cracking ribs and skulls alike. Gunships hovered like vultures, their searchlights cleaving crowds. From one rift overhead, a volley of head-crab shells arched downward, exploding in plumes of lethal creatures that scattered like swarm death upon the streets. On a rooftop overlooking a collapsed armory, medic Elena Vasquez knelt beside an unconscious child swaddled in a bloody blanket. She cradled the boy's head, humming an off-key lullaby. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. A distant rumble announced a stalker patrol, their lanky forms slipping between ruined billboards. Elena's heart hammered. She pressed a kiss to the child's forehead and slipped away into an adjacent hatch. In a derelict church near Union Square, Sister Natalia tended to a wounded cantankerous ex-firefighter named Ray Santos. The makeshift sanctuary's stained glass windows were fractured, fragments of holy imagery lit by portal lightning. Santos gripped Natalia's forearm as she applied a tourniquet to his leg. Blood pooled beneath him. He whispered, "They're coming for the church next." Above streets now posing as war zones, small pockets of insurgents moved like ghosts. Among them was the teenage tech savant Arlo Finch, lunging between overturned cars and tagging walls with chalked lambdas. Each symbol was an invitation, a promise that somewhere, resistance lived. On the city's fringe, Mika emerged beside an overturned tram, dusty rain mixing with sweat. He helped a woman wrench free a collapsed support beam to free her husband. The couple clutched each other before fleeing into the gloom. Mika's lungs burned as he climbed a stairwell toward the surface, knowing each footstep brought him closer to certain defeat, or the faintest chance of escape. Above ground, the Citadel's glow eclipsed the morning star. Its searchlights carved the sky into harsh beams that danced over leveled apartments and cratered streets. Soldiers draped in midnight blue hazmat gear marched beneath, herding civilians toward the ominous structure's gates. At the brink of the final hour, 3 figures converged near a barricaded plaza. Mika Delgado, clutching hope and photograph. Elena Vasquez, burdened by dreams ferrying the living. And Arlo Finch, eyes blazing with code-fueled rebellion. They met beneath a shattered statue of a long-forgotten hero. No words passed between them, only a shared glance of resolve. Then, from the rift above, a lone vortigant descended, electrical tendrils dancing across emerald hide. It raised its arms, emitting a resonant hum that caused air and dust to ripple. Soldiers raised weapons, but the creature's presence stilled them. A crackling voice echoed in their minds, an invitation to remember the vortessence. For a breathless instant, humanity paused its fight with itself. Mika clasped the vortigant's gloved hand. Elena touched its sinewy forearm. Arlo laid a trembling palm on its chest. Through a weave of telepathic murmurs, they felt a flood of shared memory, the distant war on Zen, the chains of enslavement, and the phoenix surge of liberation. The vortigant's eyes shone like twin suns as it uttered a single word, and the rift above widened, revealing a corridor of molten light. In that doorway lay a path away from despair. Elena closed her eyes, stepping forward. Mika followed, photograph held aloft. Arlo hesitated, then joined. The vortigant beckoned, and the 3 vanished into the rift. Behind them, the Citadel's searchlights swept the plaza. Weapons raised, soldiers called orders, but found no one to obey. And in the 7th hour's fading glow, a single Lambda symbol remained etched in chalk on cracked stone, an echo of defiance that promised the war might be over in hours, but hope endured beyond time. Epilogue. The dawn of occupation. When the dust settled, City 17 lay in silent ruin. The Citadel's great gates opened to usher survivors into pens of gray light, and combined civil protection troopers herded them beneath watchtowers. Portal storms diminished to distant echoes, Zen creatures were catalogued, caged, or culled. In the days that followed, Earth's voice was Wallace Breen's broadcast, flat, unfeeling declarations of assimilation and progress. Cities were refashioned into administrative districts. Humans wore uniform jumpsuits and ID collars. Scientific research pivoted to biotech augmentation under Combine overseers. Yet beneath the Citadel's looming presence, subtle rebellions festered. Scratchings of Lambda symbols on factory walls. Vortigern whispers slipping through hidden radio channels. Wordless rumors of refugees rescued through covert rifts. Somewhere beyond the city's broken outskirts, Sister Natalia, healed and resolute, led a clandestine clinic for the wounded. Corporal Lilichin sent coded messages describing troop movements. Arlo Finch's fractured code reassembled in underground servers, broadcasting resistance transmissions. And in a distant echo of the seventh hour's final spark, a new generation kindled in the darkness, ready for another dawn.